The EU simply ignored the fact that Georgia had done almost nothing to show support for the work the EU was trying to do. In a similar vein to the OSCE, the European Union Border Support Mission also rewrote its mandate to help its self-perpetuation. Although its new proposal was at least based on a thorough assessment, there was a large part left out. This was a part about the lack of commitment from Georgia and the fact that despite almost €2 million being spent on the mission, there was still no actual changes or impact on Georgia's border security. After 18 months spent working with the Georgians, the EU had still achieved nothing. Even the simple task of writing a basic set of operating procedures for the border guard had not been completed. No threat assessment of the different regions had taken place by the Georgians as they had been continually asked to do. The National Security Council that was tasked to drop a border security strategy paper had nothing to show for its efforts either. And the patrolling and observation of the border actually declined during this period, despite all the training given by the OSCE and support from the EU. Yet despite this, no one from either of these organisations bothered to report this or ask why they were continuing to spend millions on projects that were constantly failing to achieve even the smallest of results. Instead, they chose to propose other ways they could work with the Georgians and keep their jobs. Amazingly, despite these failures, an extension to the EU mandate was given the go-ahead to continue. And why? Because no one wanted to admit the truth, that the Georgians were doing nothing to help themselves, and that the EU's border team could not find a way to work effectively with its Georgian counterparts, short of doing everything for them, including providing funding, something which many believe was the only real aim of the Georgians. The sad truth is, this is now happening, with the EU planning to provide around €200,000 for projects related to the border guard and customs, and the taxpayers of Europe simply asked to pick up the bill, while Georgia continues to spend its own money on its military forces instead. So is it worth it? You decide. Between them, the OSCE and the European Union have spent more than €70 million of taxpayers' money in the last 5 years alone. And that does not include the tens of millions of American money poured into the border guard and coast guard services. And the impact on changing the security of the Georgian border? None. Nothing. Nada. It is partly believed simply by implementing these missions has helped keep the peace in this region. However, none of these initiatives has led towards a permanent solution to the problem, and Georgia continues to take the international community for a ride, knowing that none of the organisations will actually carry out their threat of withdrawing their support for their entry to the EU's neighbourhood policy. Too much time and effort has been put into helping Georgia that it has become a runaway train with no one willing to pull on the brakes and too many people making too much money to even raise the alarm. Instead, projects being proposed by institutions like the OSCE or the EU continue to fail due to Georgia's lack of commitment. But in truth, no one cares. Many of the so-called experts working for these organisations are recruited by their individual governments and are attracted by the financial rewards rather than the work itself. Many countries send people with no verifiable qualifications or experience, but who would often appear to be well connected to the governments back home. It has been claimed many times that several nationalities have to pay bribes to be considered for posts with the United Nations or OSCE, and that part of their salary is paid to government officials to ensure their continued employment. It's no surprise when daily allowances can be more than a full month's salary to some nationalities, and a year's employment the equivalent to a lifetime in their home countries. The OSCE, for example, paid its border monitors a daily allowance of €158 a day, plus an extra €30 hazard pay for every day spent in the border area, and this was on top of the salaries their home governments give them. The United Nations can pay its employees up to $4,000 a month subsistence allowance over and above their annual UN salaries. With salaries in some Eastern European countries averaging only €500 to €600 a month, it's not hard to see the attraction to such posts. It's also not surprising to find that when a mission has run its course, that a mild panic sets in and results in a rush to find an excuse to extend the mandate and continue carrying out work, regardless of concrete results and real impact on the host country. While within Europe the OSCE has in part tried to replace the United Nations, recognising their internal problems and stagnating bureaucracy, it's not yet managed to hold itself up to the same scrutiny. As a diplomatic tool, it may have some value, but in terms of value for money, it's too busy trying to keep itself in work and justify its existence in other fields that, like so many other large organisations, it constantly fails to deliver any lasting results, but continues to cost the taxpayer large sums of money.